This video analyzes the game played between Noteboom, who played with the white pieces, and Dozberg, who played with the black pieces. The code of the opening used was D51. This opening is called the Queen's Gambit declined, 4.bg5 and bd7 sidelines. Result, white won the game. What is the first move of the white player? White, pawn moves to d4 in the opening. It is advantageous to occupy the center with a pawn and to develop the pieces with a view to controlling the center. White begins by placing a pawn where it takes complete possession of one important square and attacks two others. Control of the two squares c5 and c5 makes it impossible for black to place pieces there. White can hope to use e5 and c5 as outposts for his pieces, which will have the support of the d-pawn. The advance of the d-pawn serves an additional purpose in opening lines for white's queen and c1 bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to d5. This is the simplest way for black to get an equal grip on the center and to prevent white acquiring more territory with 2.e4. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to c4. White offers a pawn to divert black's d-pawn from the center. In effect, it is an offer to exchange a flank pawn for a center pawn, as white can regain the pawn without any trouble. Concealed in white's proposal is a threat of destroying black's pawn center by 3. Pawn from file c takes at d5. Queen takes at d5. 4. Knight moves to c3, gaining a tempo, as white develops a piece while black must move the same one again. 4. Black queen moves to a 5.e4, and white's control of the center is imposing. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to e6. Black defends the center by supporting the d-pawn with another pawn. If white plays 3. Pawn from file c takes at d5. Black can recapture with a pawn and maintain a pawn in the center. Black does not capture white's c4 pawn, as that means surrendering the center and his grip on c4. The shutting in of his c8 bishop, after 2 black c6, and the consequent difficulty in developing that piece effectively is one of the reasons for the popularity of the Queen's Gambit for white. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to c3. A good move, as the knight attacks the two central squares e4 and d5, adding its influence to the pawn's pressure on the latter. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight moves to f6. Black's knight develops toward the center, where its mobility is greatest and where it can counter the pressure exerted by white's knight. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to g5, a pin which threatens 5. Pawn from file c takes at d5, pawn from file e takes at d5, 6. Bishop takes at f6, when black must either submit to being left with a badly doubled pawn by 6. Black pawn from file g takes at f6 or lose a pawn after 6. Black queen takes at f6, 7. Knight takes at d5. The threat is actually of minor importance. White's real aim in pinning the knight is not to institute a threat that can so easily be parried. What White is interested in is the most effective placement of his pieces, and the development of the bishop al g5 is extremely strong. The restraint it places on black's knight and the cramping effect it has on black's whole game is not easily shaken off. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight from file b moves to d7 in queen's pawn openings. Black's queen's knight does its best job at d7, not c6. At d7 it supports the other knight and helps prepare the advance of the c-pawn to c5. The b8 knight must not move to c6, where it obstructs the c-pawn. The c-pawn must be free to advance and attack white's center. Black incidentally sets a trap with the text move, which is designed to catch the greedy player. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to e3. Why not win a pawn by 5? Pawn from file c takes at d5. Pawn from file e takes at d5, 6. Knight takes at d5 instead. There would then follow 6. Black knight takes at d5. The knight breaks the pin by brute force, 7. Bishop takes at d8. Bishop moves to b4, check. 8. Queen moves to d2. Bishop takes at d2, check. 9. King takes at d2. King takes at d8, and black has gained a piece. White could not fall into the trap if he followed the principle which covers these cases: do not chase after pawns at the expense of your development. White's last move supports the central d4 pawn and creates an outlet for the f1 bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to c6, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been bishop moves to e7, black strengthens his d-pawn and opens a diagonal for his queen's use. He plans a counter-attack beginning with 6. Black queen moves to a5 and 7. Black bishop moves to b4. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to a3. This puts a stop to any such maneuver, as black's bishop can never get to b4 to pin the knight. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to e7. Black develops a piece, unpins the knight and clears the back rank for castling. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to c2, an ideal development for the queen in this opening. At c2, the queen exerts pressure on the c-file, which will be strongly evident after center pawns are exchanged, and controls the e4 square. The latter circumstance is the reason for the queen coming into play at this point, instead of the expected mobilization of the kingside pieces. It is vital to guard the c4 square so that black cannot tree himself easily by playing 7 black knight moves to e4 and exchanging some pieces. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black castles on the king side. Black moves his king to safer quarters. He cannot free his crowded position by the Lasker maneuver. 7 black knight moves to e4 as white responds 8. Bishop takes at e7, queen takes at e7, 9. Knight takes at e4, pawn from file d takes at e4, 10. Queen takes at e4 and wins a pawn. Notice that white's pawn at a3 prevents black from regaining the pawn by 10. Black queen moves to b4, check. Showing that white's sixth move was not a waste of time. Instead of the passive kingside castling, black should have tried for counterplay by 7. Black pawn from file d takes at c4, 8. Bishop takes at c4, c5, which disputes control of the center and helps clear a diagonal for his c8 bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to f3. White brings his king's knight to its best post and attacks the e5 square again, putting an end to any contemplated break by black e5. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to a6. Preparation for the maneuver. 9 black pawn from file d takes at c4, 10. Bishop takes at c4, b5, 11. Bishop moves to d3. Bishop moves to b7, followed by an eventual black c5. This would serve to develop the c8 bishop, free his queenside and start action against white's pawn center. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook moves to d1. If black is going in for an attack on the wing, white is prepared to meet it with the recommended antidote play in the center. The position of the rook at d1 acts as a deterrent to central pawn exchanges by black, as any clearances on the d-file increase the pressure of the rook on that file. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, rook moves to e8. Black brings his rook to the e-file, as the center is usually the theater of action. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to d3. With the entrance of this bishop, white's development is nearly complete. Notice that he plays no combinations of any sort, either to win material or to start an attack on the king, until most of his pieces are brought off the back rank and into play. It is only after these pieces are posted where they are most effective, where they control the center, enjoy their greatest mobility, and take possession of a good part of the important territory, that white looks around for a combination, a stroke that will decide the game quickly. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn from file d takes at c4. Black has delayed taking this pawn until white's f1 bishop made a move, so that the bishop will now lose a move in recapturing. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at c4. The recapture is forced. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to b5. Black makes the bishop lose time in retreating and vacates the b7 square, ready for the development of the c8 bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to d3. From this square, the bishop manages to be remarkably useful. It reaches out in two directions to attack, it helps guard e4 from invasion, it threatens black's kingside and, by attacking h7, prevents black from freeing himself by means of 12 black c3. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to h6. If 12 black c5, then 13. Pawn from file d takes at c5. Knight takes at c5, certainly not 13. Black knight takes at c5. 14. Bishop takes at h7, check. And white wins the queen by discovered attack, 14. Bishop takes at h7, check. And white wins a pawn, as the pinned knight is equals helpless to take the bishop. With the text move, black moves the h-pawn out of the attack of white's queen and bishop. Now he hopes to free his queenside and establish a state of tension in the center by 13 black c5. Incidentally, he would like white's g5 bishop to declare its intentions. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at f6. A very fine concept. White does not waste time holding on to the two bishops but plays to prevent any counterplay by black c5. If he can keep the c-pawn from advancing, black's game will be fearfully cramped, and he may never solve the problem of getting his light-squared bishop settled on a decent square. The immediate object of 13. Bishop takes at f6 is to divert one of black's recapturing pieces, the knight, or the bishop, from its surveillance of the c5 square and the support of a pawn moving to that square. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight takes at f6. This is probably better than taking with the bishop, as black's queen and c8 bishop now have more freedom. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, castles on the king's side. The king, who must be secured from danger at all costs, goes into hiding, while the rook, that must take part in the fighting, comes closer to the scene of action. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to b7 with rook and queen on the same file. It would be foolhardy to venture on 14. Black c5. White simply takes the pawn, 15. Pawn from file d takes at c5, and punishes the recapture. 15. Black bishop takes at c5 with 16. Bishop moves to h7, check. Winning the queen. Black's idea, besides that of developing the light squared bishop, is to bring his rook to c8 and then push the c-pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to e4. White clears the c-file so that he now has three pieces, queen, knight, and d4 pawn, concentrating their power on c5, with the aim of making an advance of black's c-pawn to that square impossible. Notice too how white has resisted the temptation to play c4, filling up the center with pawns. Instead he keeps the c4 square free and utilizes it as a springboard for his pieces. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, knight takes at e4. Otherwise, white might swing the knight over to c5 and completely smother black's queenside. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at e4, still keeping black under restraint. He may not play 16. Black c5 as his b7 bishop would be snapped up. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to f5. Black must drive the bishop off at once, even at the cost of weakening the pawn position on his king's side. A delay gives white time to play 17. Knight moves to e5, intensifying the pressure on the c-pawn and incidentally providing the f3 square for a bishop retreat, followed if need be by 18. Rook moves to c1. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to d3. The third visit of the bishop to this square. White must not be hasty and play 17. Bishop takes at c6 as the reply. 17. Black rook moves to c8, pins the bishop. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to b6, this was a mistake, a better move would have been pawn moves to g6, once again preparing the liberating pawn push. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook moves to c1, this was a mistake, a better move would have been queen moves to b3, the position demands that white devote all his efforts to sustaining the blockade of black's c-pawn. White must acquire undisputed control of the c5 square, so that the pawn may never advance. He must not relax for a moment, as domination of the key c5 square virtually assures him of a positional win. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, rook from file A moves to c8. Black persists in his plan to push the pawn. If he does not get this move in, his b7 bishop will never have any heir. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn moves to b4. White nails the pawn down. White has a won game, strategically. What remains is to apply the proper tactical touches to compel the opponent to yield. The time is ripe for the combinations to appear. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to d8 ready to parry 20. Queen moves to b3, threatening 21. Queen takes at e6, check. Or 21. Bishop takes at f5, with 20. Black queen moves to d5. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, knight moves to e5, a powerful blow. White attacks the unfortunate c-pawn, which must stay where it is, a third time. Against passive resistance, White plans 21.f4, to give his knight additional support and to stabilize the center, followed by 22. Bishop moves to e2 and 23. Bishop moves to f3, after which the c-pawn must perish. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to a5, this was a mistake, a better move would have been bishop moves to d6, black attacks one of the pawns hemming in his queen side. Against 20. Black bishop moves to f6. White slicks to the script with 21.f4, followed by 22. Bishop moves to e2 and 23. Bishop moves to f3. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to b3 again threatening 22. Queen takes at e6, check. Or 22. Bishop takes at f5. White probably gave no more than a glance to 21. Pawn from file b takes at a5, to which black can reply 21. Black queen takes at a5, 21 black bishop takes at a3 or 21 black c5, any of which gives him far too much freedom from white's point of view. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop moves to d6. The defense that black had relied on is ruled out. If 21 black queen moves to d5, then 22. Queen takes at d5 and white wins a pawn after 22. Black pawn from file e takes at d5 23. Bishop takes at f5 or 22. Black pawn from file c takes at d5 23. Bishop takes at b5. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop takes at f5. The first bit of actual violence brings in a pawn. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to f6 with an attack on the bishop and a double attack on the knight. Black hopes to get his pawn back. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to b1. This was an inaccuracy. The idea of this withdrawal to the back rank is to support the queen in an attack along a diagonal, either by moving the queen to c2 or by shifting the bishop to a2 behind the queen. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, bishop takes at e5, this was an inaccuracy. Black does not care to part with the services of an active piece, but he must do so in order to recover the pawn he lost. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, pawn from file d takes at e5 forced. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen takes at e5. Material is even, and black seems to have survived the worst. It is true that white can win a pawn by 25. Pawn from file b takes at a5, but he would be left with doubled and isolated pawns on the a file, and it is doubtful that he could get any advantage from the extra pawn. There must be a better reward for line positional play than this dubious bounty. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, rook moves to c5. White spurns the pawn, in favor of piling on more pressure. The rook now holds black's queenside in a paralyzing grip. The strength of white's move is evident in the fact that the rook can never be dislodged. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, pawn moves to a4, an intermediary move, whose purpose is not only to save the pawn but also to gauge white's plans by his next queen move. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to a2, this was a mistake. A better move would have been queen moves to c2, a remarkable retreat. One would expect 26. Queen moves to c2 so that the queen, backed up by the bishop, might penetrate black's kingside position. However, black refutes this cleverly by 26. Black queen moves to f6 and now, 27. Queen moves to h7, check. Is met by 27. Black king moves to f7, when white has no means of furthering the attack. 27.e4, intending to banish the queen by 28.e5 and then pierce the position. 27. Black e5 and black repels any invasion. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, queen moves to d6, this was a blunder. A better move would have been queen moves to f6, the defense. 26. Black queen moves to f6 succumbs to 27.e4. Now we see the point of 26. Queen moves to a2, it is to pin black's e-pawn and prevent 27. Black e5 at this point. 27. Black rcd8. 28.e5. Queen moves to f4. 29. Queen moves to c2, threatening 30. Queen moves to h7, check. King moves to f8. 31. Bishop moves to g6. Rook moves to e7. 32. Queen moves to h8, checkmate. 29. Black queen moves to g5. 30.f4. Queen moves to g4. 31. Rook moves to c3, when the entrance of the rook at g3, followed by 33. Queen moves to h7, check. Is conclusive. Notice that the move 31. Rook moves to c3, relaxing the pressure on the queen side, is not an infraction of principle. An attack that leads to a forced win takes precedence over positional considerations. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to c2. Now this grouping has more effect. White threatens 28. Queen moves to h7, check. King moves to f8. 29. Bishop moves to g6. Red 8:30. Queen moves to h8, check. King moves to e7. 31. Queen takes at g7, checkmate. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, rook from file C moves to d8, this was an inaccuracy. A better move would have been king moves to f8, if 27. Black e5 to guard the g6 square with the queen, then 28. Queen moves to h7, check. King moves to f7, on 28 black king moves to f8, 29 bishop moves to g6 wins easily, 29.f4, threatening 30 pawn from file f takes at e5, check. 29 black e4 30. Bishop moves to a2, check. King moves to f6 31. Queen moves to f5, check. King moves to e7 32. Queen moves to f7, check. And white wins the bishop, as a start. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, queen moves to h7 check, control of the light squares leading to black's king renders this a decisive invasion, the cramping of black's queenside and the smothering of his bishop make it difficult for black to hold out. What do you think it was the next move of the black player? Black, king moves to f8, this was a blunder, a better move would have been king moves to f7, on 28 black king moves to f7 white can either win the exchange by a bishop check or pursue the attack by 29.f4, when the continuation might be 29 black rook moves to h8 30. Queen moves to g6, check. King moves to f8 31.f5 e5, or 31 black queen moves to e7 32.f6, 32.f6 and white wins. What do you think it was the next move of the white player? White, bishop moves to g6 further confines the king while attacking the rook. The threat is 30. Queen moves to h7 h8 plus king moves to f8 e7 31. Q pawn from h8 takes at g7, checkmate. 1-0 black can only delay the execution at great cost in material. White's play is a fine example of the value of preventive strategy. In paralysing black's queenside, he demonstrates the extraordinary fact that weaknesses on one wing can lead to complete collapse on the other. Once black is held in restraint, his efforts to make some sort of stand seem little more than feeble flutterings.